Hello, climbers, and welcome to Season 4 of Climbing Mount CMMC.
Welcome back, climbers, and welcome to our new season, Season 4 of Climbing Mount CMMC, right, Kaleigh?
Yep, that's right. We are here.
Whoop, whoop.
We're live.
We're kicking off, and we're going to be talking about POAMs, and also we're going to slide in a little thing called OPAs. That's what we call them, is OPAs, and we're hoping everybody follows suit with us on that.
That's what you call them, but thank
That's-
you for clarifying.
that's-
Okay, thank
yeah.
you for saying that. Yeah.
But we'll talk about that in a minute. But what we want to do is we want to introduce everybody to what a POAM sort of is. There's a little history lesson about how they were used incorrectly in the past. And then kind of the DoD sort of took their toys and left and said, we'll come back. And that thing they came back with was 32 CFR. And they really brought the hammer down on how POAMs are really supposed to be handled. And I thought, let's have Kaleigh talk about it.
Okay,
Kaleigh,
good deal.
would you enlighten us and wax poetic with the history of POAMs and how they were used incorrectly in the past?
Let us talk about history. Now, I just want to clarify, I never in the past misused a POAM, okay? I'm just talking about what I've heard, okay?
Right.
And so please don't come at me for misusing a POAM. Now, a plan of actions and milestones. In the past, we have used these as a beautiful opportunity to just put everything on a piece of paper and say, hey, I'm CMMC Level 2 certified because I know what I don't have done. And that doesn't really make any sense, right? A plan of actions and milestones should basically show or include the key components of your CMMC Level 2 requirements and what still needs to be done of those 110 controls from NIST 800-171. They need to be remediated, right? They need to be fixed. These are not things that you've done good. These are things and actions that need to be remediated to get to that perfect score of 110. Now, here's the problem. The time frame. Let's talk about that, right? In the past, people would put on a sheet of paper, on an Excel document, all of the things that they need to fix to get their -5 to an 110 score for CMMC Level 2. And then, left it at that and said, well, we'll get to these someday in the future. We'll do it. I swear.
I think Katie Arrington in a rant, and she's ranted about this multiple times. I think she said 99 years or something like that.
99 years.
The time frame of how long they would give themselves to actually fix the solution. And then the businesses would just move on like normal and pretend like nothing ever really happened. And that was their attempt to address the 7012, right? And the 7019 requirements and the 7020 requirements, and all of those kind of wrappered up, and everybody said, this is our solution. We've worked the system and we've managed to dodge this bullet through having to actually implement this. And they just used POAM like it was some type of magic shield.
Yes, to still be able to get the contract, right?
Right.
Which is the most important thing. But the DoD said, yet no more. We will not be doing that. And 32 CFR final rule came out in December. Well, it was fully released in December, on December 16th of 2024. We're in 2025 right now as recording this. And so it has been, released and out for a hot minute now. That's what I like to call it, hot minute. And there's not an exact science to a hot minute. I do want to clarify too, that in January, we can now start doing CMMC Level 2 assessments. Now, POAMs have now become way more defined for 32 CFR final rule. It has decided, let us put a time frame on this POAM that once did not have one. So 180 days is when a POAM should be closed out. All of the things, all of the controls and assessment objectives that are listed on there should be closed out. But it does not stop there, right? There are even more requirements for a POAM. A POAM should be given to you after doing a CMMC Level 2 assessment, and you cannot have any 5 pointers, so controls that are worth 5 points on there, or controls that are worth 3 points on there, right? So that's even another requirement for POAMs. Also, you can't have a POAM if you have listed its controls that are pretty big controls and important controls. I can have those listed up on the screen, but if you failed or have not met one of those controls, you don't even have the option for a POAM. Like, there it goes out the window. So
I think it's like SSP, like the SSP one is one of them.
System security plan. Why are you doing an assessment in the first place if you don't have a system?
You don't even have an SSP.
Yeah, that's actually crazy.
It's like, can you check out my car? I don't have one though.
I know.
You're like,
take a look at it though, because it might be a really cool one. Yeah, you can take it to a trade show. You don't even have one. It's a bicycle.
Well, and I think it's important to kind of realize that there's kind of like a POAM, and its context is relevant to where you are as an organization. And what I mean by that is if you're going through the audit and the assessor has deemed your organization not to have met the 110 like Kaleigh's talking about, but you failed some specific controls. Those controls are so difficult to hit magically, so you can POAM it. Like I think I've equated it to falling out of a 3-story building and like breaking your toe. Like it's like you're going to break a lot more than that. And if you're going to fail an assessment, chances are you're not going to magically hit those numbers and be able to POAM anything. But let's just pretend, for pretend's sake, that you did hit the magic POAM controls that you could fail.
We call it POAMable, right?
POAMable, right? And then you could actually have those 180 days. But let's set that aside. Let's not talk about the assessment itself. Let's just talk about an organization that's already passed, right? So they've already passed their assessment, and now they're level 2. They're not conditional. They've already passed. But something happens, right? Let's say that you did an audit review and you realized that you do not have the controls met at all in these certain sections through a revelation, right? You've said we have separation of duties and you don't have separation of duties because a whole bunch of people have access they shouldn't, and you did an audit and you caught this. And you're like, crap. At that point, you now are out of compliance and you have a POAM item that you have 180 days to resolve. If you don't, then you've kind of come completely out of compliance and you're really gone off the rails. So they're giving you that opportunity to correct yourself to get back into compliance in that time frame, so you got to do it. Now, let's say you're before the audit, you're supposed to have a POAM to build, but you don't have 180 days to build that. It's kind of weird when you're going into your assessment, you're supposed to have a POAM, and it could take a year or two for you to get your environment ready for your level 2, and they will let you do that, but you don't have a level 2 compliant environment. That's the critical difference there. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So you don't have to have built your environment in 180 days. No one really would expect that to happen. But in your audit, they're going to say, show me your receipts, show me your POAM that has showed you to ramp up. And that's something that we got kind of like, they kind of grumbled at us about. That's a new word I just made up. Yeah, about our POAM, because we didn't show enough information they wanted to see in our POAM. Because we sat down and built our container and just ramped it up quickly and didn't have a lot of detail of how we did all of these types of activities because of the fact that we built it so fast in that containered environment. It wasn't like something that we took years. We did it in months. And so because of that, and we had it in such a compressed time frame, we didn't have as much detail. Now, trust me, we're not going to make that mistake again, but they want to see a certain level of detail of what controls you've done where, how you corrected them, how were they deficient, what was the time frame you did it, who was responsible for it, how you assessed and reviewed it. They just want to have more information in that POAM and fill that information out. And they're going to look at that. There's a specific control that is part of your assessment where they review that.
Now, I do think it is important to bring up an operational plan of action, what you like to call OPAs, that was more defined, that doesn't have a time frame that 32 CFR final rule talks about. Do you want to speak to that as well, and what the difference is between a POAM, like what we're talking about, and an OPA?
Yeah, the operational plan of action, they really call it out, and they use it, and I think in the example they use is like FIPS, which is the bane of existence for most managed service providers. They hate FIPS. And FIPS is basically a standard of how you can validate encryption. And NIST does it, and a lot of organizations like Microsoft, for example, they're always lagging behind. So the versions of Windows that have gone through the process of appropriately being validated with their encryption modules are always behind. Months and months and months and months. And so what'll happen is you have to stay up to date for Microsoft, and so that you're in the patch window of supported OSs. And what happens, which is this the bizarrest thing, is like for FIPS, Windows will be out, like they'll almost be out of support before they finally go through their validation for the FIPS module. And so now you have to use, if you want to have a fully FIPS validated environment, an operating system that's almost or completely out of compliance and won't be patched or supported by Microsoft.
Right.
And like, no one would do that. You're going to pick the patching over the FIPS validation. And so that's where the operational plan of action comes in, is when you have this divergence of situations where you can't necessarily fix it, or there's going to be a long time before you can remediate it, you would put it on that operational plan of action. And you kind of talk about what the issue is, the timeframes of how you're going to try to address it if possible. You kind of go through periodically. You should update where you are in those. It shouldn't just be Iraq where you just put it in there and can never get out. You know, like you're going to put it on there and then have review processes and look at it. But those are things. And then also operational plan of actions could be things that you may want to improve. Maybe you're like, we want to add an enhancement on how we do things. It doesn't mean if we don't have this that the controls aren't met. So we have perfect 110, but we want to enhance the way that we're doing additional logging, or maybe we want to separate duties further to increase our better segmentation of permissions. And we just don't have time to get to it this moment, but we want to put it on that list so that we have visibility, and we're going to go through and address it.
And yeah, and so that is so important to note, because like you should not be getting this from an assessor or an assessment, like
Right.
like a POAM is tied, can be tied to your assessment, and there is a closeout required within 180 days. That is not the same thing.
And it's
as an
specifically the fact that you have non-met controls.
Non-met controls.
Not met.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So the other thing that I think is important to talk about is, like, what does a proper POAM look like, right? Of just like the certain parts of it. Obviously, let's talk about the obvious, which is the controls that are not met are inside of a POAM. And I mean, I would go to emphasize you should break out the assessment objectives under those controls as well. Now, for those of you who are listening to this, for you to fail a control, you only have to fail one of the assessment objectives under that control to completely fail the control itself. Right. So that means that there is an opportunity for a company to fail a control and have it put on their POAM, but underneath they passed some of the assessment objectives. So it's very important to break that out, right? So that you can see that differentiation there. So do you want to speak to how you lay those out as well, and just the important parts in your perspective?
Yeah, you can find some POAM templates online. I think you can even look at the FedRAMP version. I would not recommend it, but I think you have to scroll like 3 or 4 times left and right just to be able to see all of the fields that are in the FedRAMP POAM options. I mean, if you want to go to that level, hey, that's up to you. But there are some basic things that you want to make sure that you always have in there. Kaleigh, you nailed, I think, the first one, which is, having the control that is marked not met for, and go down to the AO level assessment objective. You want to know that. I think you want to have the finding of why it's there in the first place. Define the reason why it's not met.
Yeah. Why is it?
Why is it not met? What went wrong? You can kind of cheat off the paper of the assessors that have, if it's there because you went through an assessment or a mock assessment, they have to list the reason for it being not met. They don't have to provide insight on how you can get it met. They just have to tell you why it wasn't met. So then you can sort of take that and put that in there. Then what is a good idea is to have the objectives of how you're going to try to address it. Then it's a good idea to have who's responsible for it, and you want to put a time frame on when you want to get it accomplished. And then also having people typically like to see steps that were accomplished in order for you to hear. Yeah, like milestones that may have done, like if a project plan or accomplishments. They also like to see, if you really want to be a pro move, and I highly suggest you do it, is like if you say, okay, we don't have this, and you're like, well, let's just get it done, and you don't do a risk review of the process, you haven't looked at those types of things, and you just go ahead and fix it, and the auditor's like, well, did you do a risk review? Did you have a plan of how you're going to do that? Did you have ability to roll it back if there was a failure? Like, so you just basically threw all caution to the wind, didn't do a risk review, didn't do all this stuff, you went and bought another product, you didn't do a change control process to fix it, right? That's what the auditors are thinking about. Like, okay, you said you fixed it, but how did you fix it? Did you just break all of your policies and rules, accomplishing, making it met? They want to see how you did that. So you want to list those actions. So you give them a little bit of a, oh, okay, yeah, they are following the policies and they didn't break all of this
in the process. So I do want to emphasize a part that you talked about is having listed on a POAM the responsible parties. Because we have talked to people that are in the process of, they're fixing a POAM or whatnot and trying to ask for assistance with certain parts of it. I want to bring up, like, if an external service provider has to come in and help you with a POAM, and if that is possible, necessarily to do that, because you have to be very careful on, if you are having somebody come in and help you fix a control, you're opening your boundary potentially to another user or another organization. And that isn't necessarily allowed. You are kind of, be careful, because you could be changing like who is allowed in your scope, or adjusting, like, your environment in some way, which is not allowed if you've already done an assessment, because you're changing something.
Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up.
So it's like that. I feel like it does bring up, to question, you can't change or adjust something or do something when remediating a POAM item that messes up the environment or the assessment that you just had done, because it's conditional to that environment. So adding somebody like an external service provider in to quote unquote fix something that changes the environment.
Let's walk through that thought exercise, because I think that's a really good one, and I think it opens up some really cool discussions. Kaleigh, I'm so glad you brought that up. That's a good one.
I'm so glad I'm doing my job right and doing a good job
of
saying this. Yeah.
All right, so I think first it speaks to the bed that you have to sleep in. And what do I mean by that? What I mean by that is, how did you write your system security plan, your process to deal with external parties? So Kaleigh, you bring up a good point. Is it allowed for you to bring external parties into your environment? The answer is yes, you can do that. A CMMC does account for that. The controls allow you to do that. It just, you have to have a process for that. You have to have a policy that addresses it. And then guess what you have to do? You got to follow it. Right?
What? You have to follow your process.
You gotta follow your own stuff, right?
Yeah.
So, so assuming that you do have a system environment that affords and has the maturity in it that allows for outside access to your system, and you have some type of process to go through a validation of it, you can't just disregard 311 and say, yep, we've got to let them in. Like, someone's got to authorize it. You got to go through. I mean, there's all these things that they have to go through. So assuming you have a mature process that you can do that, you absolutely can bring a third party to come in and support it. That's assuming that they need access to your environment. Maybe they can just do consulting, right, Kaleigh, like you were sort of talking. So if they're not putting hands on keyboard, if they're just there helping advise or do stuff, then it wouldn't really have any bearing on that, because you're not actually impacting it, unless they've got to walk through your facilities or do things. And then you have to deal with your facilities, your whole PE domain, right? About how you would handle those if they're inside your building, whether being escorted, whether they see information they're not supposed to see. But that's aside the point. So they could come in and support your environment and help you. It is entirely possible for you to do that. It's just what you said, I think is so key, Kaleigh, is that they can't affect other controls.
Yeah. Because
Right?
what if they had to reassess AC 3.1.1 because of what the external service provider did or came into the system?
Okay, that's a good point. So let's talk about that a little bit. So, let's say that you have to get reassessed again. You're not going to be allowed to hire anybody between the time that you failed your assessment and when you're going to get reassessed. Absolutely, you can. So the audit should accommodate for you to have transitions and changes in that. So just because it's no longer exactly a match to the environment the auditors did doesn't mean immediately you've changed your environment, you're doomed, you've screwed yourself. And it's not that way. Your environment is got to absolutely change. But if you're like, okay, we used to use this product for change control and we have completely put a new one in. Okay, maybe you might, you had a broken change control process and perhaps you're fixing something, assuming that somehow that change was related to a one pointer, which I don't even know if that's possible. Probably not. But let's say that it's some control that you're trying to do and you introduce something. It's really a judgment call about whatever it is that you're trying to introduce or fix. So like, say, for example, split tunneling, right? Split tunneling is a one pointer. So let's say that maybe you failed that and you allowed split tunneling in your VPN and you fail that control. And then you're like, okay, well, we're going to switch to a different VPN that allows us to appropriately manage how that tunneling happens. Right. And so, yeah, that would be allowed. You're changing the product to accomplish the goal of what you did met.
Right.
But if you're like, we're going to Google now and you've changed your whole container because whatever, no, you just invalidated your audit because you've changed so many controls that have no bearing to what that is.
Yeah.
So really what you have to do is think about the changes you're making and they have to be laser focused to what it is you're trying to address.
Yes. I have to hear, guys, if you're listening to this episode and, you've experienced a POAM situation and had to remediate these things and come back to your assessors and, and you had the conditional CMMC level 2 and just your process of how you did that, I would love to hear somebody's story on that. I would be so intrigued. So please hit us up. Also, assessors that have experienced this or have a certain opinion on a process of this and whatnot, we would love to hear of their perspective on it. We hope you guys enjoyed this episode that talks more in depth about specifically POAMs. We talked about OPAs a little bit as well. Let us know if you want to go more in depth with that too. And yeah, let us know if you have any questions in the comments below and make sure to subscribe to be updated anytime we release a new video or a new podcast episode. But until then, guys, keep on climbing. See ya. Make sure to follow us on LinkedIn and YouTube to stay up to date on the latest CMMC news. We hope you guys enjoyed today's episode and listen out for the next one. But until then, keep on climbing.